I still remember the night they told me my husband's death was an unfortunate training mishap. They said it flatly, like his life was a line item to be filed away. I asked questions, begged for answers, but every door slammed shut, papers vanished, voices lowered, and I was left staring at a folded flag on my kitchen table, realizing the man I loved had been erased from the record as if he never mattered. My name is Gwendolyn Pratt. That wound never healed, and I had no idea a single gesture, just raising my hands in sign language to help a stranger, would rip it open and drag me straight into the truth they never wanted me to see. Morning at Union Station always felt like organized chaos, voices colliding with the crackle of announcements, the steady rhythm of shoes echoing against marble floors, and the blur of commuters weaving through each other with practiced indifference. I moved with the current until my eyes caught on someone who didn't fit the pace. An older man stood rigid near the checkpoint, his posture still carrying the discipline of service, even as confusion etched deep lines into his face. His hair was neatly cut, though silvered with age, his jacket pressed, his shoes polished to a shine that spoke of habit, not vanity. The security guard in front of him repeated the same questions louder each time, impatience seeping into his tone. The man's lips moved soundlessly. He lifted his hands in a jerky rhythm, the faint outline of gestures forming but collapsing before they reached coherence. The crowd barely glanced his way. A few muttered. A few shook their heads, as though his silence was a nuisance they couldn't be bothered with. My chest tightened. I knew that look, the helpless strain of someone trying to be understood and being dismissed instead. It pulled me back to the day my son's hands had been swatted away at a grocery store when he tried to sign for help. That same humiliation now flickered in this man's eyes. I stepped forward before I could talk myself out of it, forcing calm into my movements. When I caught his gaze, I raised my hands and signed slowly. "Can I help you?" Relief flooded his face instantly, washing away the stiffness in his shoulders. His eyes widened, softened, as if for the first time that morning someone had seen him, and from the mezzanine above, a tall figure in a 4-star uniform watched the exchange in silence, his eyes fixed on me with unnerving focus. I didn't know it yet, but that single gesture had set something in motion I could never take back. When the security guard finally turned his attention elsewhere, Harold motioned for me to follow. We slipped toward a quieter corner, near a cafe, where the smell of burnt coffee hung in the air. His hands trembled as he reached into the inside pocket of his worn jacket. With a slow breath, he pulled out a yellow envelope, its edges soft, corners bent, the paper thinned by time. He pressed it into my hands as though it weighed more than he could carry. Inside were photocopied pages of an old military report. The ink was faded, certain lines crossed out with heavy strokes, scribbled notes scattered in the margins. My stomach twisted as my eyes scanned the pages. Harold's hands began to move, deliberate and shaky. They erased him. "Your husband wasn't just a casualty." The words hit harder than any blow I'd ever taken. My throat tightened. For years I had told myself to stop asking questions, that digging would never bring him back. Yet here was a stranger handing me proof that someone, somewhere, had chosen to blot him out of the record. Pain flared hot, tangled with something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Harold signed again, slower this time, eyes heavy with memory. I served with him. He was recommended for commendation. Then the file disappeared. I couldn't let it die with us. I clutched the envelope, my fingers trembling. The buzz of the station faded into silence. One question thundered in my mind, relentless. Did my husband die because someone wanted the truth buried? The next morning, my phone rang before the sun had fully risen. A clipped voice on the other end delivered a summons. "General Marcus Llewellyn would like to see you." My chest tightened. I braced myself for reprimand, certain this was about Union Station. His office loomed vast, walls lined with maps dotted in red pins, light pouring cold through tall windows. General Llewellyn stood near his desk, posture unyielding, his eyes sharp yet unreadable. "Yesterday," he said evenly. You did what most wouldn't. You stopped. I faltered. I only knew how to sign. He shook his head. No. You chose to see him. That matters. He spoke then of an internal review. Contracts, records, files riddled with irregularities, corruption that needed daylight. He wanted me on a special task force, not as a clerk, but as someone willing to see what others refused to acknowledge. The room seemed to tilt, me, pulled from obscurity, suddenly placed at the center of something vast. I swallowed hard. As I turned to leave, his voice cut through the silence once more. Justice for the fallen doesn't come from silence. Think about your husband, Ms. Pratt. I walked out with the envelope still in my bag, heavier than ever, feeling as though I'd been handed both a burden and a chance I could never ignore. The hum of fluorescent lights filled my small office at the Pentagon, broken only by the clatter of keys as I scrolled through endless rows of contracts. Numbers blurred, but my eyes sharpened when a particular entry stopped me cold. Sierra Consulting. A modest firm on paper, yet the fees tied to its name were bloated, stacked in ways that didn't belong. My breath caught when I clicked further and saw the registered owner, Clarissa, my sister. The world seemed to tilt, the edges of the screen sharpening like glass. Clarissa, the one who had stayed close to our mother when I couldn't, who'd carried burdens I wasn't there to shoulder. Gratitude had always lived quietly beneath my guilt, but now, her name sat on a ledger that screamed fraud. The air grew heavier, pressing against my ribs. If I reported it, I would destroy her. If I buried it, I would betray Daniel's memory, betray Harold's trust. The questions tore at me, the silence of the office amplifying every beat of my heart. The computer screen glowed like an accusation, each line of text a reminder of what stood between loyalty and truth. I pressed my palms hard against the desk, my chest aching with the weight of the choice. Then my phone lit up. Harold's face flickered on the video call, his expression solemn. His hands moved with precision. That company. They were there when your husband died. The room spun. My body went rigid, as though the ground beneath me had been stripped away. The cafe near the Capitol buzzed with quiet conversations, the scent of espresso threading through the air. I sat opposite Harold, his weathered hands carefully unfolding papers from a worn folder. He slid a photocopied memo toward me, its edges smudged, the text faded but legible. This, his hands signed, was the report. I leaned forward, scanning the page. The memo described the incident that had taken Daniel's life, recommended further investigation, an investigation that had never happened. My chest tightened. At the bottom, a signature leapt from the page, the same contracting official who now authorized the deals tied to Clarissa's company. My throat constricted. This isn't just fraud, I whispered. This is a life. Harold's response was steady, unyielding. Yes. They buried it. And your sister's company, part of the burying. The words gutted me. My hand shot to my mouth, but the sob forced its way through. Tears blurred the page. I wanted to shove the memo back across the table, to reject it, to make it vanish. Instead, my grip only tightened, knuckles white around the damning truth. Harold leaned closer, his eyes locking on mine, his hands cutting through the haze of my grief. Don't stop now. You're closer than anyone ever was. I trembled in my chair, the paper burning in my hands. The truth had pulled me under, and I knew there was no way back to the surface I'd once thought was safe. By the time I left the Pentagon that evening, the sky was already sliding toward dusk. My heels echoed across the parking structure until I froze in place. The passenger side window of my car was shattered, glass scattered like ice across the pavement. Deep gouges scarred the paint along the driver's door. On the seat lay a single piece of paper, creased and scrawled in block letters. Stop digging, or next time it won't be the car. A chill coursed down my spine. Sweat beaded at the base of my neck as I forced myself to look around. Every shadow seemed alive, every movement in the distance a threat. My legs felt heavy, as though even the act of walking to the car might expose me to eyes I couldn't see. That night, the real blow came. My son's phone chimed, and he turned it toward me with wide, frightened eyes. The message was short, cruel. "Your mom isn't safe. Neither are you." I pulled him into my arms, his small frame trembling against mine. We stayed like that for a long time, my heart breaking with every shiver. For a moment, I considered walking away, ending this before it swallowed us whole. But then I saw Harold's weathered face in my mind, the silent plea in his hands, and I heard Daniel's voice as clearly as if he were beside me. Always see things through. The next day, Clarissa asked to meet. The cafe she chose gleamed with polished marble, her black suit immaculate, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside her. "Stop this, Gwen!" she begged. "I got pulled in too deep. If you keep pushing, everything will collapse. For me, for all of us." My throat burned. "It collapsed the day Daniel died." Her face faltered, but she pressed on. She confessed that she had signed on as a consultant when money was tight after his death, thinking she was saving us. Instead, she'd been bound tighter with every contract. I walked out with my head pounding, rain starting to tap against the windows outside. By the time I reached the street, the drizzle had turned sharp, each drop like a warning. The storm had only just begun. The secure conference room was sterile, its white lights too bright, the air too still. Thick walls muted the world beyond. At the head of the table sat two CID investigators, folders stacked in front of them. General Llewellyn stood with arms folded, his presence filling the room like a blade unsheathed. "We need you as a witness, Ms. Pratt," he said, voice calm but edged with iron. "You're the first to uncover the link between these contracts and the altered files." My pulse hammered. One of the investigators slid a packet across the table. The pages fanned out, and there, buried among them, was a name that knocked the breath from me. Captain Daniel Pratt. The room seemed to tilt. My hand hovered above the paper, as if touching it would set the truth ablaze. "You're telling me," I whispered, "that my husband's death happened because a report was changed?" The investigator met my gaze squarely. "Yes, it was buried under the same contractor network you've been tracing." The words detonated inside me. No more rumors, no more half-answers. Daniel's death was not fate. It was the outcome of deliberate deceit. I wanted to scream, to overturn the table, to make them feel the years of silence that had gnawed at me. Instead, I gripped the edge of the desk so tightly my fingers ached, holding the fury in my bones. General Llewellyn's eyes locked onto mine, unflinching. His voice cut through the stunned silence. "This is no longer about numbers on a contract. It's about lives. The question is, are you ready to stand?" My throat tightened. I swallowed hard, unable to speak. But inside me, the answer had already been forged. The conference room inside the Pentagon was suffocating in its order. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, draining every trace of warmth from the space. Rows of chairs faced a long table draped with the American flag. CID investigators seated with folders stacked in neat, intimidating piles. Across the room, attorneys shuffled papers, their voices clipped and sharp. I sat at the witness table, my palms pressed flat against the cool surface. In front of me lay the documents, contracts bloated with false charges, records bent and rewritten until the truth had been smothered. Harold Kessler sat a few seats down, his frame trembling, yet his chin held high. Clarissa was opposite me, her hands clenched into white fists, her eyes swollen with unshed tears. The questioning began like a volley of arrows. The defense attorney fired accusation after accusation, his words trying to paint me as nothing more than a bitter sister lashing out. My hands shook, but my voice held. "I'm not here out of resentment," I said evenly. "I'm here because the evidence speaks for itself. Nothing more, nothing less." Then Harold pushed a recording device across the table. A brittle voice crackled from its speaker. An old meeting. Men in authority discussing Daniel's accident, deciding to leave it off the record. The room fell still, the silence sharper than any outburst. Clarissa broke next, her voice fractured. "I thought I was saving us," she whispered, sobs breaking through. "But I was only a pawn." The weight of it all pressed down until General Llewellyn finally rose, his voice cutting through like steel. "We don't protect reputations here. We protect the truth." His eyes locked on mine, steady and unyielding. In that gaze, I felt the mantle pass. This was the point of no return. A week later, the findings were delivered in a closed session. The room carried no fanfare, no cameras, no reporters, only the solemn presence of those tasked with facing what had been hidden. The walls seemed to absorb the weight of every word spoken. The CID lead investigator read the results with clinical precision. The contractor responsible for years of manipulation was stripped of every active contract. Names of high-ranking officials who had signed off on falsified documents were listed, each one now facing criminal charges. The list was long enough to make my stomach turn. Across the room, Clarissa sat rigid, her once perfect composure unraveling. When her name was read, it came with the note that she had cooperated. She would not face prison, but there was no saving her reputation, no restoring the career she had bartered away. I watched her stand when the meeting ended, her steps heavy, as though each one carried the weight of everything she had lost. My chest ached, but there was no undoing the choices she had made. Then the words I had waited for. Captain Daniel Pratt. His file had been corrected, restored in full. His death no longer dismissed as routine, but acknowledged for what it was. A tragedy compounded by deliberate concealment. His record now bore the truth, and with it, the dignity that had been stripped away. I felt Harold beside me. His frail hand rested on my shoulder, trembling but steady in its intent. He signed slowly, with tears in his eyes. They finally listened. The dam inside me broke, but for the first time in years, my tears weren't born of grief alone. They carried release, a sense that a chain had snapped. When I stepped into the corridor, the afternoon sun spilled through the glass, warm and unyielding. For the first time since Daniel was taken from me, my chest rose without the familiar weight. I could breathe again. The morning air at Arlington carried a solemn stillness, broken only by the whisper of flags rippling in the wind. Rows upon rows of white headstones stretched into the distance, each one marking a story cut short. The symmetry was both beautiful and unbearable, a reminder of sacrifice and silence. Our family gathered near a modest plot. Harold sat close, his posture as straight as his frail body allowed, while a few veterans with hearing aids and walking canes flanked the back rows, their presence quiet but powerful. My son stood beside me, clutching my hand tighter than usual. The new engraving gleamed fresh against the white stone. Captain Daniel Pratt. Beneath it, the line that had been missing for too long, the recognition of his service, his sacrifice. I pressed my palm against the cool marble, the surface grounding me. My voice trembled as I whispered, "They can't erase you anymore." Behind us, General Llewellyn stood apart from the crowd, his cap tucked under one arm. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The small nod he gave was more than acknowledgement. It was respect, the kind that didn't demand words. The ceremony ended without fanfare, no cameras, no speeches, just the simple dignity of truth restored. Yet walking away from that stone, I felt something loosen in my chest that had been wound tight for years. Months later, in a modest hall in Washington, I stood before a different gathering. A banner stretched across the room. Veterans Inclusion and Transparency Program. The initiative had grown from a seed planted at Union Station. Now real, now breathing. Veterans with hearing loss, with visible and invisible scars, filled the seats. Families, too, hopeful and wary. Harold was there, front row, his eyes brighter than I'd ever seen them. When the applause quieted, he lifted his hands, his movements deliberate. This time, they listened. I felt tears burn but steadied myself. I signed back, clear and certain. We made them listen. The room erupted in silence. Only sign language can hold. Dozens of hands raised in shared acknowledgement. In that moment, I understood. I had walked into this story as a widow clinging to fragments of a man erased by paper and politics. But standing there, I was no longer bound to grief alone. I had become something else, a witness, a fighter, a builder of a culture that would not look away again. Justice had given Daniel back his name, but legacy demanded more, to protect those who still lived, and to ensure the next time someone tried to bury the truth, there would be voices and hands ready to answer, 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 ready to answer,